audience. My family has graciously agreed to listen to my informative speech. So here we are. Crying over spilt milk. Taking things with a grain of salt. When pigs fly. Letting the cat out of the bag. If you take these phrases at face value and only consider the words that make them up, they sound really ridiculous and make no sense whatsoever. And that's pretty much what the definition of an idiom is. An idiom is an expression that cannot be understood from the meaning of its separate words, but that has a separate meaning of its own. Now, we understand this separate meaning because we've grown up as part of a culture that understands that separate meaning. We understand that to let the cat out of the bag is to reveal a secret or a surprise when it really wasn't supposed to be revealed. We understand that when pigs fly references some future time that we really don't expect to ever happen. And we understand that to take something with a grain of salt is to not take it at face value, to be a little bit suspicious of it. And there are lots more examples that I could give you. In the English language, there are thousands of idioms. I can't give you an exact number because language is never fixed. It's always in motion, it's always evolving. Words are coming into practice and coming out of practice, and the same with idioms. But some sources believe that there are up to 35,000 idioms in the English language. I could not tell you 100 of those, honestly, and I don't personally believe that all of those 35,000 are currently in use. But if I, as an English speaker who's been speaking English all of my life, cannot tell you that many idioms and would not understand the context of most of them, you can understand how for foreign speakers that are learning English as a second or third or fourth language, our idioms can be really, really confusing to them. When I was doing research for this project, I went on Google and I typed in the search bar English idioms, just for some general research. And the first page, what came up was a bunch of sites about learning English, the top 50 idioms. To become like a native speaker, you have to understand these idioms. And that just goes to show you how much these idioms really are a big part of how we communicate and how we understand each other. And honestly, idioms are also a big part of translation issues because, like I said, it's not just the literal meaning of the words that's important, it's the meaning behind them. If you were to take a phrase like barking up the wrong tree and put it into Google Translate and turn it into Spanish, you would get ladrando al árbol equivocado. And I apologize to anyone who speaks Spanish who's listening to this because I don't think I said that right. But honestly, what that translates to is absolute rubbish because barking up the wrong tree means absolutely nothing literally translated. It definitely does not mean looking in the wrong place. So when you're talking to people from other languages and you're translating things that they're saying in your language and vice versa, you need to be very aware that it's the meaning that needs to be translated, not the words. So I've talked a little bit about how important idioms are to our language and the issues that you can come across with other languages and other foreign speakers and our own idioms here in English. But I haven't said anything about where these idioms come from. And honestly, some of them have got to have some pretty interesting stories behind them just because of how strange these combinations of words seem to us. And I cannot claim to know the stories behind most of them. There are plenty of scholars who have done a lot of research on this subject, and I'm sure that you can find out a lot of these stories. But I am personally familiar with one of them in particular, and it's the story behind the phrase to turn a blind eye. And I happen to think it's very interesting. I'd like to share it with all of you. Now this phrase has to do with one of my favorite historical figures, Vice Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson of the British Royal Navy. Now, Admiral Nelson was he's not a very conventional figure. He was very, very famous, very popular, but he liked to do things his own way, and he liked to take the initiative. And over the course of his career, he'd managed to lose his right arm and the sight in his right eye. And then in 1801, he fought in a battle called the Battle of Copenhagen against the Danish forces. And he was not alone in command of this particular battle. There was a more conservative officer who outranked him, and his name was Admiral Sir Hyde Parker. And during the battle, Parker became concerned and decided, oh hey, we need to get out of here, we need to retreat. And so he decided to raise signal flags on his ship to order retreat. And one of Nelson's officers, Mr. Foley, came up to him, and he basically said, look, Admiral Parker has raised signal flags. And Nelson picked up his spyglass, his telescope, stuck it to his right eye, which if you remember, he could not see out of this eye, and said, you know, Foley, I have only one eye, and I have a right to be blind sometimes. I really do not see the signal. And he put away the spyglass, and he continued fighting the battle, and the British won the day. Now, historians have argued a little bit about whether or not this is actually where that phrase came from, but they believe that it most likely was. And now you may be saying, why do I care about idioms? Why is any of this relevant? And honestly, you may not care. But idioms are a large part of our language, and you will interact with them. And if nothing else, you now have an interesting tidbit of knowledge that the next time someone uses the phrase to turn a blind eye, you can be content in your superiority, that you know where that came from, and if you're feeling particularly benevolent, you can share your knowledge with the rest of your coworkers. Thank you.